It's night in the royal palace. 44th door, but it's really called the underground dungeons. There's a girl sitting in a cage. Her older brother, the universally adored Ricardo, walks in. He looks at his sister and says he has a request. Ricardo wants his sister to die instead of Gabrielle. After his words, the moment her ears caught her brother's words. The girl's heart was filled with sharp barbs before and now shattered. Did he really want her sister to give her life in Gabrielle's place? Because she's already sitting in this dungeon instead of hers. Ricardo tries to justify himself and says that it could not have been done otherwise. Gabrielle is weak and would not have been able to endure the dungeon. The girl can't stand it and tearfully asks her brother if it would be all right if she died. The sister is frightened, and in her words, she sounds all the pain that has accumulated in her. Ricardo does not look her in the eye, but says that she told him that she is repeating this life for the 7th time. Dying time after time, the sister goes back in time. The sister looks at him. Her face shows the marks of the blows. She asks with pity why Ricardo remembers it now. Ricardo replies that surely when his sister named Hillis dies, she'll be alive again and in the past tense, so he asks that Hillis die for Gabriel. Hillis doesn't understand why the words that come from those beautiful lips are so cruel. She can't hold back the tears and the drops fall to the floor. Hillis, through her tears, says that Ricardo treated her with disdain. Her brother also said that she was talking nonsense and that Hillis was just attracting attention. But now Ricardo has come to her and asks her to give up her life. But Ricardo just doesn't say anything. Inside, Hillis realizes that if he's not even trying to make things right and get her out of the dungeon, it's not like he's doing her any good. She realizes that all this time, Hillis has been doing everything in her brother's place. Hillis even took on Gabrielle's crime because she wanted the same love that Ricardo gave Gabrielle. Hillis would want her brother to see her crying and hurt sitting there and for him to help her. The girl wants him to worry about her sister Hillis once in a while. Hillis holds the bars that hold her back in the cage with her hands and says that she is Ricardo's little sister too. But the brother doesn't pay attention to his sister's tears. He clearly doesn't care because the guy says that Hillis is selfish and she should help her little sister. Hillis says she can't take it anymore. She can't take it anymore, but Ricardo doesn't give up. He kneels down in front of Hillis. He says that this is the only request he has. He says that Hillis will only go back in time and death will take a moment, but for Gabrielle, it will be over forever. So he wants Hillis to suffer only 1 second of pain. His words make Hillis truly terrified. She could never believe that a man could ask her to suffer death and argue that she only needs to suffer for a second. Ricardo is probably crazy. A demonic smile appears on his face. He asks Hillis with heat in his eyes to think about their Gabrielle, because Hillis can easily die. From horror, Hillis is shaking and does not even know how to answer her brother. At that moment, Ricardo, smiling, says that Hillis had told her that she had gone through death 7 times, and it would not be difficult for her to go through one more small death. Ricardo keeps telling and saying that he doesn't know how her past deaths happened, but after so many times, her sister should be used to it, and dying once won't be hard for her. At this point, Hillis finally starts to realize something. After all, it was Hillis who had always been Ricardo's own sister, and for what reason was it that Gabrielle, without a drop of sibling blood, had become Ricardo's dear little sister? In that moment, Hillis lost that very hope, because in the end, she meant nothing to her brother. Her hope had sparked in her soul throughout the 7 deaths, but today, in Hillis's soul, that hope has been dashed. Hillis tells Ricardo that from now on, she will no longer call him her older brother. She thinks to herself that after 7 failures, she is finally convinced that Ricardo remained the last scoundrel until the end. And now Hillis wants to return the favor and repay all the offenders for what they deserve. Ricardo saw how his sister had changed. The guy was struck to the core. After a while, Hillis finds herself at the very moment where her preservation stopped. She always returns to this very moment in her life, and a familiar growl comes to her ears. Is a familiar spectacle during which the boys are attacked by a demonic creature. The beast has opened its maw to devour anyone who gets in its way. Demonic dogs were always dangerous. When it became very dangerous, Ricardo ran past Hillis to save Gabrielle. He rushed to Gabrielle and hugged her, protecting her with his body and trying to get Gabrielle as far away as possible from the vicious beast that attacked them. Hillis is left alone against the demonic beast that is off the chain and wants blood. The girl has started her 8th life, and her eyes are filled with boredom and frustration because she can't change the people around her. And no matter how hard she tries, everything repeats over and over again. At the moment when Hillis used her ability and enveloped the beast with thorny vines, Ricardo, along with the others, watched her actions with horror. At this time, Hillis was able to captivate the demonic beast without any trouble, for she is the enchantress of the ability of one of the 4 noble bloods called Blossom, Hillis. After capturing the monster, she goes to Ricardo's side and tells him that he's truly horrible. She goes on to say that her brother threw the girl to the monster. Ricardo tries to justify himself somehow and says that Hillis misunderstood him. Gabrielle says she's scared because her sister's gotten weird, but none of this has any effect on Hillis. She continues to walk coldly and says she is very much surprised. After all, this beast was bought at Gabrielle's many requests because they are in fashion now. Gabrielle had been cranky for a long time because she wanted to get a closer look at the demonic beast, so Gabrielle was the one who caused the incident. Hillis says the last words as if hammering the last nail in the coffin lid, that they have all safely forgotten about these facts. Ricardo tries to rebuke Hillis because Gabriel is in shock. And how can Hillis say that? She interrupts her brother and says that she always knew what an unbearable person he is. Now Hillis asks Ricardo to keep him out of her sight because she doesn't want to see him. It turns out that there are 4 great families that have existed in this world since ancient times. All 4 clans are divided by the principle of the seasons, which is followed by the spring, summer, fall, and winter clans. In each clan that embodies the 4 seasons, magical abilities and sacred power have been passed down from generation to generation. Over the years, the blood of the clans has weakened, and their abilities have faded as well. But long ago, the ability was passed on to only one person each generation. That in this generation, the power would be awakened by Ricardo, who had thick Innowaden blood in him. But no matter what Ricardo did, he could not inherit the power until Hillis died. That night in one of the rooms, Ricardo asks Gabrielle to wipe away her tears and drink the cure. But Gabrielle refuses, because her favorite brother has done something very bad and now she's disappointed. Gabrielle tells Ricardo that during the day he forgot all about her and was only worried about Hillis. As Ricardo was trying to justify his behavior, his father enters the room and calls Ricardo, the current head of the Spring family. One of the 4 great families called Innowaden is Diego Innowaden. The next moment, Gabrielle jumps to her father and hugs him. Her father gently strokes her and tells her that he has been informed about everything and that it was good that no one was hurt after the incident. Ricardo is upset standing in front of his father and says that he has very important information for his father. He says that Hillis has the ability to blossom. The next moment, the head of the family becomes very serious. He says that Ricardo probably had the power at the moment of danger and was able to protect Hillis. But Ricardo sadly looks down at the floor and tells his father that the roses were appearing behind Hillis's every move. So the power is probably not his, but Hillis's. Father gets very angry and says that Ricardo should realize it himself, because every generation only one person can have this power. And of course, that power must be Ricardo's. Before leaving, Diego says that he understands his son perfectly well and asks him not to worry and not to tell anyone about what has happened. Tomorrow morning, his father will call Hillis and see for himself if everything really happened. The next morning, Hillis comes out of her room, and the servants around her are very shocked. After all, they didn't set the table for Hillis, and now there is only food at the table for Diego, Ricardo, and Gabriel. But Hillis is clearly spitting from on high at everyone around her. She's already been reborn 8 times, and she doesn't care about such trivialities. So she boldly sits down to eat her breakfast. The butler and the servants start to panic. One of the bravest butlers says it's the head of the family, and he can bring the lady's dish to her room later. But Hillis replies to the impertinent butler that she will eat here and now, and will only leave when she has finished her breakfast. While eating a delicious steak, Hillis reflects that it's been a long time since she's had a proper meal. In the prison where she was in her 7th life, even a sip of water was hard to come by, and such a delicious breakfast for Hillis, compared to the hunger she suffered in her imprisonment, seems like an unprecedented luxury. Mistress rises from the table and decides for herself that she will never have to starve again. She says in her voice that it was very good and she liked the food. Hillis wipes her hands after the meal and says that the servants will be very much punished if they continue to humiliate her with second-rate food. The servants are confused by these words and say they don't understand what the mistress is talking about, but Hillis throws down the cloth carelessly and says with disdain in her voice that all this time they have been allowing themselves to feed Hillis with scraps from the table. Did the maids really think she wouldn't notice the maid's negligence? Hillis is on her way out and says that from now on, they should bring her the kind of food the girl had this morning. Hillis comes out of the refectory and sees her father and Ricardo in front of her. She overhears parts of their conversation where they discuss that Gabrielle is still not able to get back to her normal state. She had to ask the chef to make her favorite cake. But when Diego and Ricardo notice Hillis, they ask her what she wants in the dining room so early in the morning. She thinks to herself that Gabrielle is the reason they're late for breakfast, and judging by the fact that she's not with them, she's staying in her room, once again feigning ill health. Hillis walks by and realizes that it hasn't even been a minute since she's had enough of them. Her father starts ordering Hillis to stop and keep quiet. He demands that his daughter tell him everything herself, but Hillis continues to walk forward without paying any attention to her father. But when she reaches the door that leads to the next hallway, she decides to turn around and ask Diego for what reason he wants to hear her. The father, along with Ricardo, is in unbelievable shock. Was Hillis really that brazen now? But the girl explains that usually when a person calls someone and asks them to stop it, it's customary to give a reason. She has the right to know the reason her father is stopping her. Diego angrily asks how Hillis dares to insolence him, but the girl turns around and says that, judging by such an obvious question, her father is not ready to talk yet. So she asks her father next time to first think about what he wants to talk about, and only then to call her. At the end, Hillis looks contemptuously at her father and says that if he doesn't want to see her, why would he provoke unwanted communication? Hillis continues to walk away quietly, as behind her, her father begins to shout in anger. Ricardo tries to calm him down, saying that Hillis is also in shock because of last night's incident. That's why she's acting like this. The father tells his son that it's no reason to treat his own father so insolently, where Hillis picked up this bad behavior. But Ricardo says that breakfast is ready and tries to push his father towards the dining room. But when they enter the room, they notice the maids who say that Hillis came into the dining room this morning and ate his father's portion. Diego clenches his teeth with incredible anger and orders that Hillis be brought to him immediately. At this time, somewhere in her room, Hillis realizes that she has had too much to eat at breakfast, but she is very pleased to feel satiated. Hillis has some sort of unpleasant premonition. A sassy girl named May bursts into her room, and the girl is her personal maid. May is amazed that Hillis is awake at this moment. Hillis herself thinks it's been a long time since she's heard May's rough voice. The maid says that Mistress's behavior is predictable. After all, Hillis does nothing but laze around every day, and sometimes she must have days like this. Hillis realizes that despite their difference in status, May sees Mistress as a simple person, and with Hillis, she's clearly blurring the lines between who's a maid and who is the mistress, and for all the 7 lives Hillis has lived. May had ignored her mistress and looked down on her, but suddenly Hillis realized how she could be of use to her. Hillis could use May's wit to her advantage. Hillis, with as tired as possible from everything that had happened to her before, said for May to stop talking and bring Mistress water for washing. The maid is very much surprised and asks Hillis, "Did she really turn to her now?" Hillis replies with optimum coolness in her voice that there is no one here but May, and she will regret it if she makes Mistress repeat herself twice. A little later, May brings water for washing, but she does it very carelessly so the water spills out and gets on Mistress's feet. Hillis is not going to stand for this kind of treatment and is going to put the maid in her place. She has an angry fire in her eyes, and she throws water on May. This is the kind of behavior the maid didn't expect, and May thinks to herself that there's one oppressed person in their house, is the ugly duckling of spring and the useless weed that grew in the rose garden. These are the words to describe Hillis, who serves May. The maid always looked down on her mistress. Though at first, when she was assigned to Hillis, she thought her luck had run out. But the sight of a noblewoman groveling before a maid lifted May's spirits, for she liked to feel strong and unpunished. But it was probably when the water got on Hillis's feet that her carefree taunting of Mistress ended. Mistress got very angry and poured the water back at the maid, then began to threaten that May couldn't even do such a simple errand. Hillis says that the maid brought her ice water for washing and stands defiantly in front of her with her head held high. Hillis says that when this situation becomes known, even if Mistress whips May with a rod, does the maid think anyone will stand up for her, on top of everything else? Does May think that a maid who was sent away for such a stupid reason will have a chance of getting a job in another house without any problems? At the moment May was being scolded by Mistress in her head, a thought came to her mind. For just yesterday, Hillis was obeying her commands, but today it was as if she had become a different person. Hillis doesn't stop talking and threatens the maid further with the same cold face that expresses no emotion. Mistress says that the maid should go and do everything as fast as possible and by the rules before she chops off May's hands for such insolent behavior. The maid, out of fear, even took hold of her hands, worrying, and their safety. In the next moment, May bowed and apologized. She said that she would now prepare everything properly again. After a while, Hillis was already washing her face with warm water. She is satisfied with the work she has done. Now May will obey her and won't cause any trouble for Hillis. Mistress notices that she has only dull clothes in her closet. For as long as she can remember, Gabrielle has always had all the nice clothes. Unlike Gabrielle, Hillis has always worn only tight and dull clothes. Although now such a small thing doesn't matter anymore. Hillis tells May that all the dresses in her closet are old and she doesn't like them. Hillis uses her power to turn all the dresses into rose petals. The mistress asks May to clean up inside. May realizes to herself that the rumors that have started to spread around the palace were probably true. The next moment, the servants enter Hillis's room and tell her to go to the master because he is calling her. Hillis is very angry with them because the servants didn't even knock before they came in. She tells them all to tell the master what she said. Hillis wants her father to come to her himself if he has something to say to her, because Hillis doesn't want to hear anything from her father. Hearing this answer, the servants were shocked. The butler asks, "Does the mistress really mean it?" Hillis replies that she will not joke with them. If they could understand her from the first time, they should leave her room as soon as possible. May tries to explain to Hillis that the master will be very angry with her for such behavior. Hillis replies that her maid should not shout so much because her ears hurt from such volume. The next moment, someone enters the room. Ricardo tells his father to calm down before he speaks. The father enters his daughter's room without knocking and yells that she has completely lost her conscience. Ricardo asked to leave Hillis alone, so the father held back, but now the daughter's behavior is out of line. Hillis reacts to her father's words with a smile. She laughs at him when she sees her daughter smiling. Her father's anger grows even stronger. Ricardo tries to hold Diego back and says that the same thing happened in the dining room. Now Hillis has to apologize to her father, but Hillis asks why she would do that. After all, the dining room is a place where she is allowed to go just like the rest of the mansion. Ricardo says that's not the point, because if Hillis wanted to eat, she should have just waited for her father. But Hillis says that if she sits next to her father at the same table, she'll lose her appetite, and she doesn't want that kind of trouble. Ricardo tries to say something else, but his father interrupts him and says that enough is enough, and such behavior is not allowed for his daughter. While thorny vines appear around the father, he continues to make them and says that at first the father continued to tolerate her. After all, Ricardo said that Hillis was very much frightened, but now Ricardo will not put up with it. Hillis thinks to herself that apparently her father just wanted to ease his guilt over what happened in the garden. What head of the family wouldn't feel guilty if there was some noise and trouble in his mark, especially if there was danger to the children? At one point, the father wonders if this is what he has been teaching his daughter. Hillis decides to stand up and say that her sweet father certainly didn't teach this behavior. The father agrees with his daughter and says that even though she has now begun to realize her mistakes, she is still behaving inappropriately. Hillis gets close to her own father, and at that, a smirk appears on her face, and her eyes continue to stare with coldness. She says that her father certainly didn't teach her this behavior because he never taught Hillis anything at all. The girl coming so close showed that she was not afraid of her father's abilities. The story was a very ordinary one. Hillis's father favored a marriage of convenience while denying sincere love. Diego could never forgive Hillis, his own daughter, who had been born at the cost of his dear wife's life. But spring finally came to their icy home when, 5 years later, the master of the spring house remarried a widow. She was a beautiful woman who looked strikingly like her mother's portrait, and she also had a young daughter who looked like her mother at 2 drops of water. Her name was Gabrielle. Gabrielle was liked not only by Ricardo and her father, but also by all the other people in the palace. And of course, Hillis herself admired Gabrielle, but Hillis had no place with them. One day she watched Gabrielle run at full speed to her father. Then Hillis was very worried. After all, if one ran up to her father so hard, he would get angry, as the girl knew from bitter experience. But the father treated Gabrielle much more warmly than he did his own daughter. Hillis was amazed because her father had never been so kind to her. When the girl wanted to touch her father, then Hillis remembered his look. He looked down on her with disdain and told her not to dare to touch him so impudently. As soon as Hillis saw Diego's behavior when Gabrielle was near him, she realized that Gabrielle had taken her daughter's empty place in her father's heart, and they had become the perfect family. After all, Hillis had not been in the Inoaden family since before she was born. The events return to Hillis's room, where she tells her father and brother that since she has received no education from her parents or older brother all her life, she's never been taught manners. Hillis tramples on the sharp vines that her father summoned with magic and says that she can't help it because she was raised in such conditions from childhood. It's her father's fault for neglecting her upbringing, his own child. The heroine says that Diego never once took responsibility as a parent and asks him if it's too late to claim his rights. Diego, wrinkling his forehead, says that the reason his daughter is being so cocky is because of the incident in the garden. The father goes on to say that what happened to her yesterday can't be an awakening. After all, she didn't even inherit their hair color. The maid hears the conversation and nervously holds the pile of petals that the mistress has created. Father goes on to say about the most common misconception that has taken place. It was Ricardo who was afraid for Hillis and unknowingly awakened. The father tells his daughter not to even think about spreading false rumors and deceiving others. He orders her to stop acting like she's worth anything. Hillis turns her back on the people she's fed up with and says she doesn't have to follow their selfish orders, especially since the awakening wasn't at Ricardo's. Hillis doesn't even want to hear from her father and says there's nothing they can do about their pushy daughter. Are they going to lock Hillis in this room until she becomes obedient, or are they going to change her mind with a whipping? But if they don't do either of those things, they have no other option but to kill her so that Hillis would never see them again. At the moment that her father resented what Hillis had said, she realizes that all the things that girl said they'd already done to her in her past lives. Hillis comes back to reality from her thoughts and says that this mansion only has 3 floors, but that's still pretty high. She asks father what would happen if she fell from here. If Hillis really awakened yesterday, she will remain unharmed, but if not, she will die or be maimed. She asks her father with an incredible joy and sincerity she has not shown before. What end he wishes for his beloved daughter. At such words, the father is sullenly silent, and Hillis realizes that he will have no answer. Hillis jumps out the window and creates a huge pile of petals beneath her, which smooths her fall. The girl spreads her arms and legs apart and feels a little bit of freedom. She sees a flower appear near her face. She realizes it wants to comfort her, and she strokes it, thanking it for being so kind. She looks up at the sky and realizes that it is very warm sunshine, weather just right for an afternoon nap. Hillis looks at her father and Ricardo standing at the window of her room and thinks to herself that in her first life, she too had that stunned look on her face. Then her awakening had been like a thunderclap to the family. That comes out of the clear sky. Hillis realizes she was pathetically stupid in her first life, and Hillis plunges into her memories, where she was shaking with fear and begging her father's forgiveness because her power should have belonged to her brother. She honestly didn't understand why the power was hers. There's obviously some mistake, and Hillis has to somehow get it back for her brother. The father would then get very angry and take advantage of the girl's fear. He told his daughter to shut up and threw a vase of flowers right into the wall behind Hillis. He said if Hillis was going to keep talking this nonsense, he'd better shut his mouth, because if he knew how to get the power back for his brother, he would have done it a long time ago. Doesn't Hillis realize why he's so angry right now? There's got to be some way to fix this whole problem, so Hillis has to sit in her room and wait for him to find a way to fix it. Diego also forbids Hillis to talk to anyone. He orders her to leave because he's sick of looking at her. Hillis then apologized and said it was all her fault and the power should originally belong to her brother, and it was the girl's fault for taking it away. Ricardo treated Hillis no better, and Hillis thought it was all her fault. From that day on, Diego made every effort to give her abilities to Ricardo, and of course, that finding a way wasn't so easy. The head of the Winter family had stated that it seemed that Ricardo's abilities were strangely delayed and that the Springs needed to consider a generational change. For the head of Inoaden, it would surely be a big blow. For the father, a great deal of pressure. From the other clans forced to lie to everyone. In the end, Diego officially told the entire public that the awakening was in Ricardo and Hillis made him his shadow. If the girl didn't listen well, they beat her. There was one time when Hillis stopped her magic when Ricardo was supposed to show her power to everyone. Hillis tried to justify herself and apologized. She was suddenly dizzy, but no one would listen. Her father took her by the hair and told her to shut up. He said Hillis had made a fool of them all. Ricardo was disgraced because of her. When father left her room, he told the maid not to give Hillis a drop of water until he allowed it. Hillis cried and blamed herself for shaming her brother. Therefore, it is necessary to go and apologize to her little brother as soon as possible. Back then, the heroine was very inexperienced and stupid. She thought that she was loved by everyone. It's just that it's all the girl's own fault for not trying to help the family. Gabrielle walked down the corridor and said that lately there was a very heavy atmosphere in the house that even became gloomy on the soul. Hillis approached Gabriel. The girl told her that Hillis should not leave her room because if anyone saw her, they would be in a bad mood. Even Gabrielle noticed that. Hillis said she hadn't even thought of that and she would do as Gabrielle said. The girl turned around and said that Hillis should be more careful from now on. And the heroine at this point meekly looked at her feet. She thought then that Gabrielle wasn't in the mood either. Then it would probably be even more difficult with her brother. It seemed to her that Ricardo hadn't come home yet, so she could wait for him out front and apologize properly. Hillis waited for her brother out front, but there were gossiping maids around her who said it was very unpleasant for the girl to be here. She probably wants attention. Hillis thinks to herself that if she stands here, she won't bother anyone because she isn't very conspicuous. Hillis wishes her brother would come back soon. While the girl was waiting, she got a stomachache. Apparently, she had a bad fall when her father was arguing. Probably Hillis is really incapable of doing anything. When her brother finally came home late at night, the girl didn't even have time to apologize to him before he pushed her away and moved on. She noticed the smell of alcohol. No wonder Hillis gave him a hard time. Hillis shouts back to Ricardo that she was sorry for setting him up, and she will train better to avoid making similar mistakes in the future, because her father is also looking for a way to get Ricardo's strength back. The heroine is greatly embarrassed and says that she never wanted this ability and the power should have been Ricardo's from the beginning. The brother then turns around and says with a drunken smirk on his face that the noble ability of their family chose a noble heiress who never wanted the power. He said that he felt like a dog who can't keep up with the chicken because the chicken is on the roof. He goes on and says, after all, Hillis probably purposely decided to make fun of him. That's why she made the mistake during the day to humiliate her brother. Ricardo wants Hillis out of here because he's not in the mood to watch a lowlife like Hillis. Then he pushed his sister and she started to fall down the stairs, and even at that moment, the girl still firmly believed that if he was her brother, He would surely help her and save her sister, that his hand would reach out to her now and help her. Hillis just hoped that he never showed that he loved her too. After all, they were family, but he remained looking at her with contempt in his eyes and never lifted a finger to help her. And so ended Hillis's first life. Events return to the real world, where Hillis is now. The head of the Great Winter family learns in a letter that Ricardo has not inherited the family's abilities. Instead, it is Hillis who has inherited it, and it is Hillis who has made the roses bloom. This is the heir to the house called Farvanov, Christian Farvinon, and he orders the servants to prepare the carriage, for he is about to go to the spring mansion of Innoedin. There was quite a commotion at the Innoedin spring mansion itself after Hillis had thrown herself out of the window. Then the interest of everyone in the residence turned to her, and everyone was just discussing Hillis's eccentric behavior. And Diego and Ricardo walked around with grim faces. Gabriel didn't like the atmosphere. When Mrs. Hillis was resting under a tree, peacefully basking in the sun, Mrs. Gabrielle approached her unnoticed. She blocked the sun, which Hillis was not happy about, and looked at her half-sister with an angry face. The younger sister cheerfully asked Hillis what she was doing here. Gabrielle noticed that Hillis was lying outside in her nightgown. She was surprised at the time, because the maids were discussing that Hillis had jumped out of the window in her nightgown and was now resting outside in such inappropriate clothes for a noblewoman. The girl becomes indignant and says that she was very sick and Hillis didn't come to visit her. Gabrielle thinks that such behavior is too much, so she had to come to Hillis herself. Gabrielle was very offended. At this point, Gabrielle stops her monologue and looks at an angry Hillis, who is looking at her with those eyes, as if she wants to kill her. Gabrielle shudders a little from fright, because normally, Hillis would start apologizing for having to search for her in vain. Gabrielle even imagined in her head what a scared girl would normally look like, that she was always apologizing. Gabrielle tries to bring a smile back to her face and says that I guess Hillis is interesting. Why was she looking for her? Without hearing an answer from Hillis. Gabrielle goes on to say that Christian is coming soon, so she's dressed up a bit. And she's even wearing a pendant. Gabrielle asks Hillis if she likes the pendant Gabrielle gave Christian for her birthday. Day when she was given that pendant, Hillis also said it was beautiful. Gabrielle says, if Hillis likes this pendant so much, then let her try it on. In her mind, Hillis thinks Gabrielle's trying to trick her. Like the girl's gonna fall for it. She's just gonna put it on. Gabrielle will pay up and say that Hillis took it, thus playing a cruel trick on Hillis. But now Hillis is much more experienced and realizes that she would be foolish to fall for such a thing. And to be honest, Hillis doesn't really care about anyone around her, including Gabrielle, who makes a lot of noise. When Gabrielle pulled the pendant towards Hillis and said she would help her fasten it around her neck, Hillis interrupted her words and with the utmost coldness in her voice told her to get the hell out of here, for it was blocking her son. Hillis used her power to hang Gabrielle upside down, causing her sister to become very frightened. At the moment when Gabrielle asked to be let go, the servants started to run in, who were incredibly shocked by what was happening. Meanwhile, Christian arrives and says that he could not have imagined such a sight. Gabrielle happily looks at Christian, who has come to her rescue, and asks him to help her free herself from Hillis's magic. Meanwhile, Christian sits down on his knees and says that he never thought he would see spring blossom with anyone other than Ricardo. But after seeing it with his own eyes, he can admit that no one would be more suited to roses than Hillis. Christian takes a lock of Hillis's hair in his hands and, enjoying its scent, says he's honored to meet the new owner of the roses. He asks Lady Hillis to come with him to Farwinan. Meanwhile, still hanging around, Gabrielle yells for Christian to take his hands off Hillis. But Hillis won't take her magic away. Meanwhile, Christian doesn't notice, but he keeps looking at Hillis. Wants to ask for her hand, but Christian slaps the hand he's holding on her hair and walks away, trying to catch up to Lady Hillis, and begs her not to go, for she can't just refuse his offer, but the girl shows her. Christian thinks about it and asks Renok if her character will change when she wakes up. But the guy replies that he doesn't know this information. Christian thinks it's all very strange. Hillis must like him. Renok remarks that maybe Christian should go to Mrs. Gabrielle. She's his fiancée. Meanwhile, Gabrielle's already freed and the maids are crying loudly and trying to calm her down. But Christian says there's no need for that now because he's found the real gem, which will be bigger and brighter than all the others. Meanwhile, Hillis continues to leave. She pays no attention to anyone her first death was due to Ricardo's betrayal. But after her death, she opened her eyes again and realized with horror that she had returned to the day when the monster raged. It was her first rebirth, and she was in a reality that Hillis was very hard to distinguish from a dream. Felt confused, she thought to herself then. Could it all be a dream now? But she remembered exactly how she had fallen down the stairs and died, and then in her moment of constant doubt, she had been supported by the only person who would come to her. It was Christian, heir to the Winter family of Farwinan, who was Gabrielle's fiancé and the man in whom Hillis was secretly unrequitedly in love with. Hillis then asked him why he had come here and if Christian was looking for her. A minute she wasn't here, Christian replied that he had said many times that he had come to see Lady Hillis for today. She had spent the whole day alone. He did not support her from these words before, but she tried to keep her temper in check. For Christian, Gabrielle's fiancé Christian had said then that her family were horrible people who made her unhappy. Even being around them made Hillis feel lonely and abandoned. How can you call people like that family? That he was getting too close, and it embarrassed her a great deal. Christian went on talking and suggested that Hillis should go to Farwinan with him because he wants to protect her. Hillis says she can't because he's Gabrielle's fiancé, but Christian says that if she's the only problem, he'll solve it because the engagement was originally a decision between their families, nothing more and nothing less. But Hillis thought the two seemed very close, but Christian says he swears there was never a moment when they were truly sincere with each other. Then Hillis thought if it was just a dream she'd wake up from one day, it wouldn't be a big deal. If she said yes, Christian assured her not to worry about anything. He took her face and said that Lady Hillis should think only of him and look only at him. Hillis couldn't contain her feelings. She agreed to go with Christian to Farwinan, and it was a very foolish decision. Back in real life, Hillis reflects that Christian was always the first person from the outside to recognize about her blossoming and always started courting her after her blossoming now that she thinks about it. The reason is obvious, to include marriage to her who has strength and to continue the lineage while enhancing the abilities of the weakened Farwinan family. All of which was Christian's goal, of course, and he came to her today for the same reason Hillis called May, who immediately came running to her. She asked the girl to go to the dining room and get her something to eat. The maid seemed to vanish in a second. Her speed would be the envy of an athlete. To herself, Hillis thinks May's behavior has changed very quickly. Hillis realizes that in this life, no matter how much she eats, there is a constant feeling of hunger. As the maid hurried to leave the room, she encountered a blue-haired Ricardo, who was outraged at Hillis's behavior. He had come to resent Hillis for attacking Gabriel, but when Ricardo entered the room, he remembered the moment when Hillis jumped out of the window. His face and demeanor immediately changed, and he became less confident. Ricardo scratches the back of his head and, trying to make his voice as normal as possible, says that he heard Hillis attack Gabriel, and he's asking for an explanation of what happened. Maybe it's just some misunderstanding, Hillis says with her usual cold face, that she didn't attack Gabrielle. She just pulled her away from her because she was getting on her nerves. Ricardo can't stand it and yells at Hillis that so many people saw it, but still Hillis tries to deny it. He asks Hillis if she knows how scared his favorite sister Gabrielle was, who cried for a very long time after what happened. The heroine feathers out of her seat and smiles maniacally. She says it's wrong to call such a trifle an assault. She looks slyly at her brother and says that it seems their misconceptions of assault are slightly different. The girl uses her magic to demonstrate. What is a real attack that she knows about? She punches through the wall behind her brother and says that if the blow wasn't aimed at the wall, then the same thing would have happened to Ricardo's body. A small cut appears on his cheek, from which a single drop of blood drips. Now he's blue. No anger, but fear of his sister. The maid was also scared out of her wits. Ricardo, who is bleeding faster, asks his sister, "Has she gone completely mad?" But the girl answers as if nothing had happened, that she thought her brother didn't understand her words, because if she really attacked Gabrielle, she'd have a drop of blood. Ricardo realizes that if he hadn't dodged the blow, it could have been worse, and he might not have gotten away with just a cut on his cheek. The brother asks his sister with a kind of desperation. Doesn't she care that he might be hurt by her magic? But a girl who has been killed so many times and more than once in past lives, her brother has hurt her. Feels no compassion now for her older brother. Ricardo is shocked, looking at his sister calm as ice. He never thought she could be so calm in a situation like this. He was obviously scared and realized that in case of trouble, she wouldn't even save him. Orders the maid to prepare another room, because this room is now without a wall and it will be uncomfortable to live here. May says to make it as fast as possible, and will prepare the room with the best view on the 4th floor and also her meal. At this moment, the elder brother is sitting on the floor and realizes that Hillis hasn't even answered his questions. She's just ignoring him like he's nothing. Later, Gabrielle learns that Sister Hillis has changed her room and asks the maid why she suddenly decided to do it because her room was normal. Oh, and Hillis is moving to a room that's on the same floor as hers. The maid starts to explain that Mrs. Hillis trashed her old room, so it's not habitable yet. The maid goes on to say that she had heard her attack young Mr. Ricardo using her strength and breaking through the wall. Gabriel realizes that after she had told her brother what had happened to her and Hillis in the garden, he must have intended to go and ruin her. In the garden, he was determined to go deal with Hillis, who was just in her room. If Gabrielle is not mistaken, the brother must have scolded Hillis for hurting her little sister. Gabrielle learns from the maid that Mr. Ricardo had a scratch on him that bled very badly. Gabrielle wonders if her sister attacked her brother as she had attacked her in the garden. She comes to the room next to her little sister's to torture her. Gabrielle hears a sound outside. She gets scared, but she decides to open the door a little and see what's going on. If it's Hillis using her magic again. But she sees her father standing by the wall of roses that blocked the hallway. Gabrielle asks her father, did he do it? Father says he did it because Gillis attacked Ricardo and changed rooms without his permission, so father can't let her do whatever she wants. So he decided to block off the hallway. He says no more and I won't be in danger, so she can relax. Gabrielle thinks to herself that there seems to be something important on the other side of the hallway. She remembers that on that side were her dresses that she had recently bought. There was a new dress that Gabrielle was going to wear to the upcoming prom because Sister Hillis might get angry and destroy it. Gabrielle says she had a hard time getting it because it's the only one of its kind you can't find anywhere else. Diego sullenly says that because of Hillis, Ricardo was hurt, but Gabrielle's not thinking straight. That she heard Ricardo had only one scratch that healed very quickly. She doesn't see anything wrong with her sister and brother having a little fight, but the father can't be stopped. He goes on to say that despite his prohibition not to let strangers in, the girl did accept Christian, but he turned a blind eye. He shouts angrily at his youngest daughter that he will not change his decision, and if she continues to argue with him, let her know her father's decision is not up for debate, and he won't even let Gabrielle get away with it. The father turns around and walks away. Lastly, he says that he was going to forbid Gabrielle to appear at the next ball anyway. Now she must remember his words and think about her behavior. Gabrielle is in tears because for the first time in her life, her father is angry with her. At that moment, in her part of the mansion, Hillis was locked in with May, and even the windows were covered with roses. Now they're trapped, but Hillis is in no hurry to get upset and calmly asks May when the ball starts. May replies that the ball starts in 3 days. Hillis says that's very good and she has plenty of time to sleep. She orders the maid to choose any room in this part of the castle and rest too. May is in a real shock because it seems that even being locked up didn't faze the mistress, that she will have to spend the rest of her life here because Diego did a good job of locking them up after 3 days. May concludes that what is imprisoned in this place, where not even a ray of sunlight can penetrate, is a life of captivity, which May likes very much. Mistress Hillis is not very demanding and does not burden her with work, although it is a little intimidating. Besides, no one starves them and they get supplies every day. Besides, you can use the bathroom as much as you want without worrying about being noticed. She even tried on Mistress Gabrielle's dresses, so May decides that such a life is more like a vacation than a confinement, the girl thinks. That there's a ball tonight at the Calicia. Just as Inoaden cares for Mistress Gabrielle, the Calicia family cares for their precious daughter with awe as a true princess. It is so widely known that even a simple maid. As May knows this, and tonight is the princess's birthday ball, May thinks to herself that Gabrielle has been banned from attending this ball, and she would like to see the look on Mistress's face. Besides, young Master Ricardo, because of his wound, cannot go to the ball. It is a celebration of the 4 great families, and as none of the children of the Inoaden Spring family can attend, it is probable that only one master will go to the ball. Only one master will go to the ball, but for the maid, it doesn't matter because she's locked in here anyway. The maid goes into Hillis's room to bring her food, but when she opens the door, she notices that the barrier that had kept them in was there, and apparently the mistress had managed to get out at this time somewhere in the city. Hillis jumps from one rooftop to another using her powers and realizes that it's the birthday of a Calicia princess and she needs to prepare a gift for her. Hillis enters a basement where a thick metal door creaks very loudly, giving away the sound of someone coming inside. She sees men in front of her who are holding swords. They see the mistress and attack her, saying they've been told about the man who's coming to them. Although it turns out to be a woman, Hillis easily overpowered all the attackers with her strength and left them behind her. She thinks to herself that long ago the 4 great families arranged marriages between their men and women to keep their powers strong. In whose veins flowed the ancient blood of the family, the Calicia family of Blood Purity Radio favored marriages between close relatives, resulting in children with strong powers. But all of them died young, and there was a side effect of these marriages. Calicia power of the very first of the 4 families completely disappeared. Unfortunate family no longer able to have a gifted child just like that, and unknown to society. Hillis enters the room where the child sleeps all battered and wounded, and all around on the walls there is a lot of blood and the smell of suffering in the air. Hillis realizes to herself that she seems to have arrived before he was the one those men with swords were waiting for. Blood flowed out of the girl's cuts and turned into gems like a goose laying golden eggs. The child wakes up and sees Hillis in front of him. He asks her, is she the god of death to herself? Hillis thinks that in a past life he asked if she is an angel, the boy asks. Is he finally dead? But Hillis replies that he isn't. And when he hears these words, the child starts to shake with terror and the crazy lights in his eyes. He asks to be killed because he just wants to die. He starts to break free of his bonds and asks Hillis to kill him as soon as possible because he can't stand this torment any longer. Hillis strokes the boy and says she'll kill him and he can stop worrying. The child's tears roll down his eyes in joy, which immediately turn into gems. Hillis takes one of the gems in her mouth and says that if after he goes back to where he was supposed to be and says he still wants to die, the girl will kill him. Hillis takes the baby in her arms and says she's not the god of death and her name is Hillis. Let him remember that name very well, and tells Hillis to give him the baby. The guy is really surprised that someone is ahead of him. The man asks how this girl knows this baby smells like Inoaden, but she's not Ricardo. Has it really been a generational shift already? And what could the spring genus have brought here? Hillis smiles her manic smile as she can't help but know. Mago Calicia, who is the only descendant of the powerful Calicia lineage that was thought to be extinct. This is the boy who will become king of his family and has a bright future ahead of him. And the reason why he was imprisoned in a dungeon and abused was because greedy people wanted to sell the gems that were created by this boy's power. The boy who came says he's received a petition from Calicia to save this child, so the girl can give it to him to the head of the Berger family, Axion. Hillis recalls that in a previous life she fell for his name, but in this life, she's experienced enough not to make the same mistake again. She apologizes to the boy and tells him that she'll have to leave alone. Hillis uses the petals to skywalk away from her pursuer and continues to hold the boy in her arms. Axion grabs some petals in his fist and smiles and says he shouldn't fall behind. Meanwhile, there is a celebration where Christian and Diego meet, Christian says he wanted to greet Diego when he visited their palace a few days ago, but as he knows, circumstances were different. Diego says that he was very busy at the time. Christian asks why Diego was looking for him, since before that, Diego had rejected all his requests for visits and never replied to his letters. Diego says he's sorry because Gabrielle was embarrassed about the misunderstanding that day, and she asked her father not to have visitors for a while. Diego keeps smiling stupidly and saying that it looks like his daughters decided to make a little joke when they heard the good news about their brother because Ricardo finally has his power. And that's what the father saw with his own eyes. Diego says that on that day, Hillis asked Ricardo to make it look like Hillis had powers to play a child's game. Meanwhile, as Gabrielle supported all of this because of her inexperience, Diego continues to lie without blushing that Ricardo honored the little sister's request, but made a mistake because of the long-distance use of power, therefore. Diego asks Christian not to be offended by what happened that day. Christian asks Diego with complete calmness if this is the answer to his request to break off the engagement and the reason for ignoring his letters. But Diego looks angrily at Christian when he hears all this. He says the engagement is not something to be trifled with. And Diego, he won't let it break under any circumstances. It's an agreement between the families and it can't just be broken. Christian replies that it would not be a problem in that case. Just replace the bride. Besides, Diego's statement sounded a bit strange because the power Christian saw that day absolutely belonged to the Lady Hillis, Diego says. Lady Hillis Diego says that it must have been a childish joke that led Christian astray because it was Ricardo's power and not Hillis's. Christian doesn't completely believe Diego's words and gets up from his seat and says that whatever that power was, Diego needs to prepare for the announcement of the change of generations of the Spring lineage, and when it happens, Christian will be happy to be the first to offer his congratulations. He will be waiting for that day. Diego leaves the common room because he can't contain his emotions. He realizes that he needs to find a way as quickly as possible that will transfer the power from Hillis to Ricardo. Events take us to a backstory that tells of a family of Summers, where there were two sisters called the Princesses of Kalisha. However, as fate would have it, one of them was banished as time went on, and now the younger sister is the only one to inherit the family name. Lady Violetta is approached at the ball by Christian, who wishes her a happy birthday as he is honored to be invited today and notices that Christian is without his fiancée. Christian says it was an accident, not by his will. Violetta replies that it's rather unexpected because she thought Lady Gabriel would definitely come. Christian turns around and notices that there is no Axion today. Violetta says that she asked him to find it, that she asked him to find her a valuable gift because Axion values friendship, so he agreed to fulfill her selfish request. Christian smiles and says he's very curious what this gift is, but he sincerely wishes Violetta to get what she wants as soon as possible. Christian notices that the first dance is starting. He tells Violetta that the first dance belongs to her partner, so Christian wants to ask him to dance with Violetta on the second dance, but Violetta's cousin Terzo comes in. The guy says that the second dance is promised to him, and Terzo says that he would like to take the role of chaperone. He wishes Violetta a happy birthday and compliments her and kisses her hand. Violetta looks sadly at her brother and says that he can't be her chaperone every time Terzo replies, that it's all right. For now, the second dance belongs to him and he will be content with the dance. Violetta laughs and says her brother can be content for now. Maybe in the future, the second dance may no longer be his. Christian looks at the conversation between brother and sister in the Kalisha family and realizes that relations in this family, rather strained at one point, are disrupted by the arrival of Hillis, who arrives on her pedals with a boy who is the main gift for the birthday girl. The next moment, Axion arrives, but Hillis is long gone. People are a bit shocked that there's finally been a generational change in the Spring family. The head of the Spring family doesn't know what to do. His whole plan has fallen apart. Axion tells Diego that he sends his sincere congratulations on behalf of the Berger family. People start talking to each other. They thought Ricardo would be the next mentor, but it was a girl. Axion goes on to say that today was a great and happy event because the long-awaited descendant of Kalisha has returned. who has inherited the ability and is head of his family. Axion expresses sincere happiness that the ancient blood will not be lost. Princess Kalisha's birthday ball left a storm of emotion that the day was the beginning of a new story. After the ball, Diego rushes to the palace looking for his daughter. He questions all the maids and finally learns that Hillis is in the dining room while her father is very angry. Hillis continues her late supper as if nothing had happened. The father, in a storm of emotion, bangs on the table, which knocks over the carafe of water. He asks angrily, "Why did Hillis suddenly appear on the burrow and let her not be silent, for her mouth is not only for eating?" He goes on to say. How Hillis could think of doing such a thing in front of 4 great families. Hillis thinks to himself that it's best not to touch the dog when he's eating. But in return, he tells his father that he's bringing a present. Lady Kalisha's father is furious that he has to teach his capricious daughter a lesson and uses his strength to attack her. But Hillis, unlike her father, shows no emotion and reacts calmly to danger. The girl absorbs her father's power, leaving him no chance to fight her. Her roses are stronger and smother her opponent's roses. Ricardo and Gabriel enter the room. They are stunned to see Hillis, very much in on the trick. Kalisha's tear is a rare gemstone born from the tears of Kalisha's family members, when placed near the body of the treasure of the 4 great families. However, there is a way to make it most effective is to swallow the stone. Because when the stone dissolves inside the body, it not only increases strength many times over, but also allows you to absorb other people's powers and add them to your own. The world and between the 4 great families, except for the members of the family, no one knows of this true power of the stone. Father falls to his knees helplessly. He doesn't understand how his powers have been transferred to Hillis. Hillis gets up from the table and says that her dinner was interrupted, so she ate something else. Hillis goes on to say that now the previous head will indicate the heir by passing her brand to him earlier. It always appeared on the body of the most powerful person in the lineage, as it did on Axion Burgett's. Hillis goes on to say that it's an amazing feeling she feels the same way that Axion felt. Drawings appear on the girl's collarbones. It's the same branding. Hillis says she's grateful for her father's help. Hillis says that much in this house is of no value. But instead of a chapter, she could use her father hears what Hillis is saying and he can't resist her. Hillis says that she will use this branding until the day she dies, and nothing more is required of Diego. From that day on, Hillis is the head of the Inoadan. Ricardo, who came into the room a little earlier and heard their conversation, is shaking with fear and asks Hillis what she's doing with her own father. He demands that Hillis apologize to her father right away, because Ricardo will not stand aside. Hillis asks, "What is he going to do now in this house?" she orders, and if her brother doesn't like something, he can always leave. Though she doubts a coward like Ricardo would dare to do such a thing. The next moment, Gabrielle realizes that both her father and brother have retreated under Hillis's power, and now she is the head of the family. What is Gabrielle to do in this situation? The story takes us to a dream that Axion has. He sees a girl who controls the flowers and says it's over for them all. She kills a lot of people and disappears somewhere. Axion wakes up in his bed again, not understanding why this dream keeps happening. Axion is on a mission with Suleiman Bergetta, who eats cookies without even washing his hands of blood. The pair must find all the stones of Kalisha that were sold by the villains who were holding a child of Kalisha's power. Now they've cleared out another place, where the bandits hid their riches. Suleiman asks the head, why does he look so tired? Doesn't he get enough sleep at night? Axion confesses that the bags under his eyes prove that he really has trouble sleeping, and he has been having bad dreams lately, where he sees a girl that kills a lot of people with a smile on her face. She reminds him of the heiress of Inoadan's power besides Ricardo. Only one person with blood ties to the previous chapter could have awakened powers. If Axion is correct, her name is Hillis. At this point in Inoadan's house, Hillis is not feeling well. She must have overeaten, but she's sorry, because the calf steak was delicious. Hillis is now the head of Inoadan's family, and she can do a lot of things. She can finish what she didn't finish in her previous life. But revenge wasn't her priority because she killed all her relatives at the end of her 7th life. Their deaths were so easy that revenge lost all meaning for Hillis. It only made her more frustrated. How could she sacrifice herself for such worthless people? She looks in the mirror and realizes she has a new purpose in life. That is truly the truth. The girl no longer has to hide or indulge the whims of her relatives. Now the mistress can decide for herself her future, and in this she will be helped by the experience of past lives. Although her life now will never blossom with former colors, but Hillis believes that she had no luck with this fleeting happiness before. Now the heroine is not so stupid as before and will not try to find happiness in people. She will just create for herself her own share and change everything around her. But people to change except to kill practically unreal. Hillis is outside drinking tea in the morning. She tells the maid that she wants to buy new clothes because it's bad to wear the same pajamas all the time, especially bad when Hillis became the head of the family. Now you have to keep status and style because other clans will look up to the mistress and conduct diplomacy. For this, you need to follow the rules of etiquette. May is very happy because the maid almost died of shame when she found out that mistress went to the ball in a nightie, and now mistress will finally be able to wear clothes. May says she will get ready to go out and take everything she needs, and she will tell the butlers to get the carriage ready to go to town. But they are interrupted by Mrs. Gabriel, who says that she woke up late in the morning and could not resist wishing Lady Hillis good morning. As soon as she heard that the lady was in the garden outside, she immediately rushed to greet her. But then Gabrielle notices that although the sun has risen, it is still quite cool outside, and she throws her shawl over Lady Hillis. Because if Lady Hillis catches cold, Gabrielle will be very sad. Gabrielle requests that Hillis let her chat together over a mug of tea. Hillis smiles and says that Gabrielle has the right to talk or drink tea with anyone and everyone. Gabrielle orders the maid to bring her the same one that Hillis's sister May asks Hillis. Shouldn't she put off packing in that case? But Hillis says there's no need to pack, for she'll go shopping immediately, and quickly flies away on her pedals, pretending that nothing unusual is going on. Mistress is her own mistress and needs no carriages or servants. She primarily uses her power to accomplish her goals. Behind her remain Lady Gabrielle, and Maid May are each shocked in their own way. May is shocked that Mistress has left in her nightgown again, and Lady Gabrielle is shocked that Hillis has left her to drink tea alone at Kalisha's mansion. There is an interesting conversation going on. Axion asks Violetta when she plans to go to Innoedin. Violetta asks if he's only interested in that question because there could be more interesting topics of conversation right now. Axion didn't ask about Mago's well-being, for example, nor was he interested. Violetta tries to explain that there are many more important questions than the question about the house. Innoedin Axion says that internal affairs are none of his business. Besides, it wasn't Axion who gave Violetta the gift. Violetta says that she didn't expect Mago to be returned by someone else. Now the boy is still awake. Violetta asks what happened to the monsters who did this to the boy. Axion coldly replies that he and his assistant cleaned them all up last night. And as for the stones, Axion destroyed all the ones he could find. Now, he is hunting down the ones that were sent for sale. Violetta says that is enough, and they too can afford to do their best to find the remaining stones. Violetta thanks Axion for the help he has given her. For without him, they would not have been able to make a move for a long time. Violetta wants to do everything she can to make this child the happiest child in the world. This boy. Mago is her late sister's only child. Axion is banging on the table. He says Violetta hasn't answered his question about when Axion will go to Innoedina. Violetta looks at Axion and replies that it is extremely rare for him to show interest in anyone, but she must warn Axion that Innoedin's Hillis is very dangerous and should be watched out for. Violetta saw something in this girl. With her eyes, she doesn't know how to explain it, but Axion might regret getting close to her. Of course, he can ignore Violetta, but then Axion won't come crying to her. Axion smirks at Violetta and says that if he gets close to Hillis, he'll regret it. A phrase like that sounds very intriguing. Violetta thinks to herself that she predicted that Axion would disobey her. She says that she has scheduled a visit to Innoedin for tomorrow at lunchtime. Does Axion want to go with her? So she asks. Axion says why else would he ask her for this information? if he didn't want to go with her. Suddenly, the butler bursts into the room and says Mrs. Violetta has important news, for the young gentleman has just woken up and sees different people in front of him. He's very dear and afraid because he thinks they're going to take his blood again. He thinks to himself how much longer he has to suffer to finally die. But then he sees a woman in front of him. She calls him by name and tries to explain that no one will hurt him here. She calls herself his mother's little sister. Mago thinks to himself as he looks at this girl. Could her words be true? He could always tell if she was telling him the truth or lying, but he didn't feel anything in this woman's words, and it's very strange. Mago starts to remember the girl who saved him. She promised to kill Mago out of all the people he met. She's the only one who was sincere to him, and he wants to see her again. Then Hillis pats him on the head because she'll fulfill his wish. Mago starts to cry and asks to finally be shown Hillis Inuaden. Violetta asks the butler, "Is there any information from the man sent to Inuaden?" The butler replies that at the moment there is information that Lady Hillis is not in the palace. But then a cousin arrives who says that the boy does not want to see anyone but Hillis Inuaden. The situation is really not easy, Violetta asks Terso. Why did he come? The brother replies that he heard the news that Kalisha's precious child is awake, and he decided to rush here. The brother enters the room, where Mago is trembling with fear. He asks the boy if he wants to meet the girl who brought him here. Terso proposes to the boy that they visit Hillis right away, and he can take him to her. Maga tries to look at this man with his gaze, which shows a sense of people, but he realizes that this man is the same as the woman that was here before. Maga is scared because he doesn't know if this man is telling him the truth or blatantly lying to him. Violetta tells Terzo to think about his decision because she has sent a request to Inuaden, and Lady Hillis will be here as soon as she gets back. Terzo says if they don't go now, they'll lose a lot of time, and there's no guarantee that Lady Hillis won't be delayed while they sit around and wait for Violetta's precious child to grow up in fear. Does she really want to? That's what Violetta asks. Does her brother want to offer to go to Inuaden right now? Terzo replies. Violetta looks at Terzo and doesn't know what's on his mind. She realizes that he, like Violetta, has eyes of truth. Eyes of truth. It's a secret power that has been passed down from generation to generation in Kalisha's family. It allows her to see the truth or falsehood in a speaker's words. Violetta is disappointed and thinks to herself that it's no use if they can't use it against each other. Violetta tells her brother she'll take the boy herself, and Terzo. Let him stay at home, Terzo asks, perplexed. Is Violetta really going to walk alone with a weakened child in her arms? Is she willing to go out with him alone? Knowing how dangerous it is out there, Violetta clutches the cushion of her dress. She has one trump card left up her sleeve. She says that the head of Berger is waiting in the audience chamber and she will go with him. Terzo says that Violetta never changes because once again she is protected by Bergetta's Axion. Violetta replies that trusting the king of Berger is 100 times better than Terzo, who is the dog of the elders. As he said now, the child's peace of mind comes first, and they must do everything to achieve a common goal. Terzo says that Violetta can do as she pleases. Axion enters the room, and he sees the brother and sister looking at each other. Brother and sister, and realizes what has happened here. Violetta says to go to Inuaden today, taking Mago and Terzo with her as well. Though ask for Axion to go with her. The head of the clan says that is not a bad idea, and then turns to the boy and asks him if he heard what they were just talking about. Axion tells Mago that they are going to take him to the place where the girl the boy saw in the dungeon is, and her name is Hillis Inuadena. Hillis Inuaden says that it must be hard for the boy to trust strangers, and that is why he is afraid to go with them. But he may not be afraid, for he is Axion Bergetta, and he swears on his name. As long as he is with the boy, he will be out of danger. Now no one else can harm the boy. Mago sees with his eyesight that just as Hillis is telling the truth, it means that he too will protect him, then he can trust him. Axion takes the boy in his arms and tells the boys to send a message to Inuaden. They will go to them right away. Somewhere in the palace, the noblewomen are discussing what happened at the ball. Kalisha's power was thought to be long lost, but suddenly a descendant has appeared who has inherited that power. Now the hierarchy among the 4 great clans will change. Kalisha's vassal, Cordelia Montana, says that Kalisha is always very careful about personal information. Can't know about the real powers and plans of the great clan, but there will likely be an official announcement soon. The girl sitting next to her is called Heliona Ameli, a Farwen vassal. She says she's more interested in Inoaden because the news about Inoaden never ceases to amaze. Who would have thought that the next heir to the roses would be Lady Hillis, so young Mr. Ricardo will remain in the shadows. The girl complains that she sent a proposal for a tea party to Lady Hillis. Even though no one has ever communicated with this mysterious girl before, Hillis is now the head of the Spring clan, and it is profitable for her to establish ties with the rest of the clan, not only through friendship, but also through possible benefits for her clan. One of the girls asks if Heliona has written to Lady Gabriel. Because of all of them, she has the greatest status, in order to create the necessary authority for the future meeting. And for them now, it is important to establish contact. In order to be able to know the weaknesses of the enemy or ally, it can be seen depending on the circumstances. The girl says that's a good idea. One of the girls says that now that Lady Hillis has become the head of the family, Gabrielle's position is in question because she is not related to any of the great families. Some say that Gabrielle has become very arrogant. If you think of Lady Hillis's character, you'd never think she'd be the one to discover her powers. The girl says Lady Buestina is wrong because she saw Lady Hillis in the ballroom that day. The next moment, the girl's gossip is interrupted by a strong wind. Rose petals appear out of nowhere, and the next moment, Lady Hillis herself appears in front of them. Hillis's face expresses no emotion, for why should she worry? Now Hillis has all the necessary abilities to be able to stand up for herself and not to topple over in the mud if something goes wrong.